You're just support. You're not really doing anything that important. I didn't know it yet, but my name was already being mentioned online under a video I hadn't seen. My face went hot. I was still sitting in my car, hands gripping the wheel. My phone had buzzed a few minutes earlier, but I hadn't looked. I didn't want to, because part of me already knew that what they'd refused to acknowledge in private was now out there for anyone to see, and the exposure wasn't something I controlled. It was happening without my permission, spreading through networks I couldn't reach. The damage was already done, and I couldn't stop it. I could only wait for it all to collide. I wish I could say it began there, but it started weeks earlier. I was sitting at my desk in the clinic when the email came through. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. I had folders stacked on one side, patient intake forms on the other. It was a Tuesday afternoon, the kind of afternoon where the work was steady but not overwhelming. I was finishing documentation when I saw the new message notification. It was from Public Affairs, forwarded by my supervisor. The subject line read, Quarterly Unit Awards Ceremony Details. I clicked it open. The ceremony was scheduled for the following Friday at 1600 hours. Families invited. I scanned the message. There were logistical details about parking, seating arrangements, dress code. And then the second paragraph caught my attention. My supervisor had submitted a recognition packet for me weeks ago. I hadn't known. It had been reviewed. It had been approved. I was receiving an Army Achievement Medal. I read the line again. The ceremony would be recorded. Public Affairs would post it to the unit Facebook page and upload it to the base YouTube channel afterward. Standard procedure for official events. I sat back in my chair. This wasn't just internal paperwork. This was formal. This was documented. This was something that would exist outside of my own account of it. A recording. A citation. A public record. My reaction stayed contained. I didn't jump up or call anyone. I didn't text my friends. I felt something closer to confirmation than excitement. A steady sense that the work I'd been doing mattered in a way that could be named and recorded. I thought about my family. My parents back in Ohio, my sister Lauren, and for the first time in years, I thought maybe this would be different. Maybe if they came, they'd finally see it clearly. Not through my explanations. Not through my attempts to translate military service into civilian terms they'd understand, but through an official ceremony. A commander, a medal, a citation read aloud. I thought maybe that would be enough. I picked up my phone and opened the family group chat. I typed carefully, deleted a few words, typed again. I wanted to sound clear without sounding desperate. There's a formal unit awards ceremony next Friday at 4. Families are invited. I'm receiving a medal for my work. I'd really like you to be there. I hit send. I set the phone face down on my desk. I went back to work. I told myself I wouldn't check it for at least an hour. I checked it 10 minutes later. Lauren replied first. A laughing emoji. Then the message. Internal admin stuff? We already have dinner plans that night. Can't really cancel on people last minute. My stomach tightened. I stared at the screen. Then my dad Tom followed almost immediately. Awards for what? You get a secretary award or something. Secretary award. I read it twice. I could feel the familiar tightness in my chest, the old reflex to explain, to correct, to make them understand. But I didn't type anything. I watched the screen. My mom, Diane, didn't type anything either. She reacted with a thumbs up under Lauren's message. A thumbs up. Under the message that dismissed the whole thing. I stared at the phone. I could feel my jaw clenching. I thought about typing out an explanation about what the medal actually meant, about what my supervisor had written in the packet, about the citation, about the fact that it wasn't admin, it wasn't secretarial, it was recognition for patient care coordination under operational pressure. I thought about typing all of that. But I didn't, because I'd been typing versions of that message my entire adult life, and it never changed anything. I typed one line. It's okay. I understand. I set the phone down and stepped away from my desk. I walked down the hallway toward the break room. I didn't go inside. I just leaned against the wall and closed my eyes. I whispered a short prayer, just for self-control, just to keep myself from going back to my desk and typing out everything I wanted to say. I asked for the strength to let it go, to not argue, to not beg them to see me. I stood there for maybe 2 minutes. Then I walked back to my desk. I didn't send another message. I didn't correct them. I got back to work. But the truth is, this wasn't new. This was the system we'd been running on my entire life. When I was 11, I won an academic competition, a regional science fair in northeastern Ohio. I'd spent weeks on the project. It was about water purification methods. I'd done research at the library. I'd run experiments in our garage. I'd built a presentation board covered in charts and data and carefully labeled diagrams. I practiced my presentation in front of the mirror. I went to the competition on a Saturday morning. There were dozens of kids there. Projects spread across tables in a high school gymnasium. Judges walking around with clipboards. I won first place in my category. When they called my name, I felt something I'd never felt before. Not just pride, but the sense that I'd done something that mattered, that someone had seen my work and recognized it as good. I got a certificate, a ribbon, a small plaque. I held them carefully on the drive home. I couldn't stop looking at them. I came home and walked into the living room. My dad was watching television. My mom was in the kitchen. Lauren was upstairs. I was holding the certificate in both hands. I said, "Dad, I won." He looked up. I handed him the certificate. He glanced at it. He read the title of my project. He said, "Water purification." "That's interesting." He said, "Good job." And then he stood up. He took the certificate from me. He walked to the hallway. I followed him. I thought maybe he was going to get a frame or clear space on a wall. But he didn't. He opened the drawer, the one near the front door, the catch-all drawer where we kept things that didn't have a better place. He slid the certificate inside. I watched it disappear under a stack of takeout menus, next to spare batteries, rubber bands, half-empty pens, a broken flashlight, a tangle of old phone chargers that didn't fit any of our current devices. He closed the drawer. He turned around and walked back to the living room. I stood there for a moment. I didn't say anything. I didn't ask why. I just stood there looking at the closed drawer. My sister Lauren's awards went on the wall. Her swim meet ribbons hung on a corkboard in the hallway. Her honor roll certificates were framed and displayed in the living room. There were framed photos of her in her school play costumes. There was a shelf in the living room dedicated to her trophies. Small ones from local swim meets, larger ones from regional competitions. Gold, painted figures frozen mid-dive. Attention gathered around her wins like gravity. When relatives visited, they asked about them. My dad would walk them over to the shelf. He'd pick up a trophy and explain which meet it was from, what place she'd gotten, how many kids she competed against. My mom would smile and add details about Lauren's dedication, about her practice schedule, about how proud they were. My achievements went in the drawer, not because they were smaller, not because they were less legitimate, but because my dad valued the things he could explain quickly. The things that had visibility, the things that fit into categories other people recognized immediately. Athletic success, performance, social proof, things that could be reduced to a quick sentence at a dinner party. My mom smoothed it over. A few days after the science fair, I asked her why my certificate wasn't on the wall. She was folding laundry. She didn't look up. She said, "You know how he is." She said it like it was an explanation, like it was something I should just accept. And I did, because I was 11, because I didn't have the language to push back, because part of me had already started believing that maybe my accomplishments really were different, less visible, less valuable. I learned early that some achievements counted and some didn't. Some went on walls, some went in drawers, and the difference had nothing to do with the work itself. It had nothing to do with effort or skill or dedication. It had to do with what other people could see, what other people would ask about, what fit the narrative my family wanted to tell about itself. I thought maybe the Army would change that. I thought service might translate. I told them at dinner when I was 18. It was late spring, a few months before graduation. We were sitting around the kitchen table. My dad was talking about college applications. Lauren was talking about her plans, and I said I was thinking of enlisting after graduation. The table went quiet. My dad laughed, not meanly, but dismissively. You? In the Army? Like it was the punchline to a joke I hadn't set up properly. Lauren made a joke about me doing push-ups. My mom looked worried. She asked what I'd do after. Like the Army was a gap year. Like it was something I'd try and then move on from. I tried to explain. I talked about structure, about wanting clear standards, about service. My dad cut me off. He said, "You're not exactly the military type." I didn't know what the military type was supposed to be, but I knew he didn't see me as it. I joined anyway. I needed structure. I needed standards that didn't shift depending on who was watching or what mood someone was in. I needed a place where effort and precision got corrected and noticed in equal measure, where feedback was direct, where the rules applied to everyone. Training was hard. It was fair. The physical conditioning pushed me. The discipline was strict, but it made sense. When I did something wrong, I was corrected. When I did something right, I was trusted with more. It wasn't about being liked. It wasn't about fitting someone's expectations of who I should be. It was about meeting the standard, and the standard didn't move. I sent a photo home in my uniform. It was after graduation from basic training. I was standing in front of the American flag, full uniform, posture straight. I felt proud. I mailed the photo to my parents with a short note. My mom framed it. She called to tell me. She said she put it in the hallway. Not in the living room, not on the mantel where guests would see it, just the hallway, where people walked past on their way to the bathroom. My dad called a week later. He asked how training went. I told him it was intense but good. He listened for a minute, then he asked, "What's the plan after this? After this?" Like the uniform was temporary, like it wasn't real yet, like I was still in a phase that would end once I figured out what I actually wanted to do. I told him I was going to work as a medic. I told him I'd be assigned to a clinic or aid station. I told him the training was rigorous. He said, "So you'll be doing medical paperwork?" I said it was more than that. He said, Sure. I kept serving. I completed my medical training. I got assigned to an Army clinic on a base in the South. I worked intake. I worked patient coordination. I documented care. I stayed calm under pressure. I learned how to keep people stable when resources were tight. I learned how to coordinate handoffs between providers so nothing fell through the cracks. I learned how to read a situation and know when someone needed more attention than they were asking for. The work was constant. Soldiers came in for everything: routine checkups, sports injuries, infections, mental health concerns that manifested as physical symptoms. I learned to see the whole picture. A soldier would come in complaining of headaches. I'd document the symptoms, but I'd also notice they were underweight, that they mentioned trouble sleeping, that their answers were vague when I asked about stress. I'd flag it for the provider. I'd make sure they got routed to mental health services. I'd follow up a week later to make sure they actually went to the appointment. That's what patient care coordination meant. It meant seeing the connections. It meant making sure nothing fell through the gaps. It meant staying organized when the system was overwhelmed. It meant being the person who remembered details when everyone else was moving too fast to notice. During a staffing shortage one summer, we were down 2 medics for 3 weeks. The patient load didn't decrease. If anything, it got heavier. Training exercises were ramping up. Heat injuries were increasing. The clinic was packed from 0700 to 1800 every day. I worked longer shifts. I streamlined intake procedures. I trained newer medics on the fly. I made sure documentation was accurate even when we were moving fast, because inaccurate documentation meant soldiers not getting follow-up care. It meant problems being missed. It meant someone falling through a crack in the system. My supervisor noticed. She'd been in the Army for 15 years. She'd deployed twice. She knew what good work looked like, and she saw it in me, not just in the visible things, not just in the clean workspace or the efficient intake process, but in the outcomes, in the fact that our handoff rate improved, in the fact that fewer soldiers were slipping through without follow-up, in the fact that the next shift wasn't walking into chaos when I left. It was hard work. It mattered. But when I tried to explain it to my family, they heard only the parts they could shrink. Paperwork, basic stuff, support. At home, my work collapsed into one line. When relatives asked what I did, my dad would say, "She does medical paperwork for the Army." My mom would add, "She's in a support role." Lauren would say, "She's not on the front lines or anything." And I stopped correcting them. I stopped trying to explain the difference between administrative support and patient care coordination. I stopped trying to explain that documentation wasn't busy work, it was the thing that kept soldiers from falling through gaps in the system. I stopped announcing promotions because every time I did, the conversation turned into a performance. I'd have to explain what the rank meant, what the responsibilities were, why it mattered, and the explanations never landed. They just made me feel like I was begging to be seen. So I stopped. I let them think what they wanted to think. I let the work speak for itself, even if they couldn't hear it. But if I wasn't going to explain anymore, what could make them see it? The medal did that, or rather, the process that led to the medal. My supervisor had been watching, not hovering, not micromanaging, just noticing. She'd been in the Army for 15 years, 2 deployments, multiple assignments. She'd seen good work and bad work. She'd seen people who did the minimum and people who went above the standard. And she saw what category I fell into. She saw how I handled intake during a staffing shortage when we were down 2 medics and the patient load didn't decrease. Other people might have cut corners, simplified documentation, rushed through protocols. But I didn't. I stayed organized. I streamlined where I could without compromising accuracy. I stayed after hours to make sure records were complete, to make sure the next shift didn't walk into chaos, to make sure soldiers didn't fall through cracks because we were understaffed. She saw how I coached newer medics through documentation that looked boring on the surface but mattered deeply. How I explained why certain fields were mandatory, why certain details couldn't be skipped, why accuracy wasn't just bureaucracy, it was patient safety. How I helped them see that documentation was the thread that connected care across shifts, across providers, across time, that it was the thing that kept people from getting lost in the system. She saw the follow-up. I did. The soldier who came in complaining of persistent headaches? I documented the symptoms, but I also noticed he was underweight, that he mentioned trouble sleeping, that his answers were vague when I asked about stress levels. I flagged it. I made sure he got routed to mental health services, and a week later I followed up. I checked to make sure he'd actually gone to the appointment, that he wasn't just another name on a list that got forgotten. That's what patient care coordination meant. Seeing the whole picture, connecting the dots, making sure nothing fell through the gaps, staying organized when the system was overwhelmed, being the person who remembered details when everyone else was moving too fast to notice. She trusted me with more responsibility. She put me in charge of training new arrivals. She asked me to review protocols and suggest improvements. She listened when I flagged gaps in our handoff procedures, when I noticed patterns that could be streamlined, when I saw places where soldiers were falling through cracks that could be closed with better systems. And then she did something I didn't expect. She wrote it down. She submitted a formal recognition packet to the commander. She built a case. She used metrics. She cited specific examples. She used the language the system understood. She explained how my work had improved handoff rates, how fewer soldiers were slipping through without follow-up, how the clinic's patient care coordination had become more efficient under my involvement. She made the case that what I did mattered institutionally, that it had measurable impact, that it deserved formal recognition, and the system said yes. The packet was approved. The medal was authorized. The ceremony was scheduled. I was going to receive an Army Achievement Medal for meritorious service and dedication to patient care coordination under sustained operational pressure. That's what the citation would say. That's what would be read aloud. That's what would be on the record. The ceremony was scheduled for the following Friday. I had told my family. I had invited them. They weren't coming, but the ceremony would still happen, and it would be recorded. It would be posted to the unit Facebook page and the base YouTube channel. Public Affairs handled all official ceremonies. It was standard procedure. The video would be edited, captioned, and uploaded within a few days. It would be public. It would be searchable. It would exist outside of my ability to explain it, or defend it, or translate it into terms my family would accept. That fact sat with me all week. I didn't know what it would do. I didn't know if they'd ever watch it. But I knew it would be there. Proof that didn't require my voice. The day of the ceremony arrived. Friday afternoon, I got ready in my apartment. I put on my dress uniform. I checked every detail. Ribbons aligned. Name taped straight. Shoes shined. I stood in front of the mirror and looked at myself. I felt calm, steady. This wasn't about excitement. It was about acknowledgement. It was about being seen by the institution I served, even if my family couldn't see me. I drove to the base alone. I parked in the lot near the building where the ceremony would be held. I walked inside. The room was set up with chairs in rows, a small podium at the front, the American flag on one side, the unit colors on the other. Other soldiers were already there, some in uniform, some with their families. I saw parents, spouses, kids in their best clothes, everyone dressed up, everyone there to witness. I sat in the row designated for recipients. There were 6 of us receiving awards that day, different medals, different citations. But all of us had been put forward by our leadership. All of us had been deemed worthy of formal recognition. I didn't look at the empty seats behind me. I kept my eyes forward. The ceremony began. The commander walked to the front. He welcomed everyone. He talked about the importance of recognizing service. He talked about the values the Army stands for. Then he started calling names. The first soldier stood, walked to the front. The citation was read. The medal was presented. Salutes exchanged. Handshake. Photo. The soldier returned to their seat. Family members clapped. Someone's kid waved. This happened 5 times. And then my name was called. I stood. I walked to the front. My heart was steady. I wasn't nervous. I was present. The commander stood waiting. Someone from Public Affairs read the citation aloud. For meritorious service and dedication to patient care coordination under sustained operational pressure. The words were formal, clinical, but they were accurate. They were true. The commander stepped forward. He pinned the medal to my uniform. I saluted. He returned the salute. We shook hands. He said something quiet. Well done. I said, thank you, sir. A photographer took a photo. I walked back to my seat. The whole thing took less than 3 minutes, but it was recorded. A camera in the back of the room. Public Affairs filmed the whole ceremony, every name, every citation, every presentation. I knew it would be edited and uploaded later that week. I knew it would include my name in the description. I knew it would be tagged with the unit name and the base name. I knew it would be searchable. The ceremony ended. People stood. Families gathered around their soldiers. There was talking, congratulations, photos. I stood and waited for the room to clear. A few people congratulated me. My supervisor came over and shook my hand. She said she was proud. She said I'd earned it. I thanked her. I meant it. I walked out to my car. I sat in the driver's seat, still in uniform. I didn't start the engine right away. I just sat there. I whispered a quiet, thank you, not for their approval, not for the medal itself, but for the steady confirmation that what I'd been doing had weight, that it could be named without me having to beg someone to see it, that the institution I served recognized the work even if my family didn't. I felt something I hadn't felt in years, a kind of release, a kind of peace. I drove home. I went inside. I changed out of my uniform. I carefully unpinned the medal and put it in a small box. I set the box on my dresser. I didn't post about the ceremony. I didn't call anyone. I didn't share it on social media. I just let it be. 3 days later, the video went live. It was Monday afternoon. I was at work when I got the first notification, an email from Public Affairs. The quarterly awards ceremony video had been uploaded to the unit Facebook page and the base YouTube channel. Standard procedure. The email included links. I clicked on the Facebook link during my break. The video was there. 11 minutes long. Professional editing. Clean transitions between recipients. Captions with names and ranks. Music in the background. I scrolled through the comments. A few likes from people in the unit. A few shares. People who'd been there. People congratulating their friends or family members. Nothing unusual. I closed the app. I went back to work. I didn't think much of it. The video was public, but it wasn't going viral. It was just documentation, a record. Something that would sit on the internet and get a few views from people directly connected to the unit. I figured my family wouldn't see it unless I sent it to them. And I wasn't going to do that. I'd extended the invitation. They declined. The ceremony happened. The video was posted. That was it. I was wrong. That evening, I was at home. I changed out of my uniform. I was making dinner. My phone was on the counter. It started buzzing. One notification, then another, then several in quick succession. I picked it up and looked at the screen. Facebook notifications, comments, tags. I opened the app. Someone had commented under the video, a name I didn't recognize, someone from my hometown. The comment said, "Isn't this your sister?" And they'd tagged Lauren. I felt my stomach drop. I opened the video. I scrolled to the comments section. There it was, the tag, the question, and below it, more comments were already appearing. People I went to high school with, people from my hometown, people who knew my family, people who hadn't thought about me in years but remembered my name. Wait, that's Megan Carter, from our graduating class. I didn't know she was in the Army. That's incredible. She's a medic? Wow, good for her. The comments kept coming. People were watching the video. People were tagging other people. Hey, isn't this the Carter girl? Did you know Megan joined the military? The algorithm was picking it up. It was being shared, not virally, not nationally, but locally, in the networks where my family existed, in the circles where their opinions mattered, where their social standing depended on how things looked. Lauren didn't respond to the tag, at least not publicly. But I knew she'd seen it. I knew they'd all seen it, because within an hour the shares multiplied. Someone posted it to a local Facebook group for alumni from our high school. Someone else shared it in a community group my parents were part of. The video was spreading through exactly the networks where my family had spent years reducing my service to a single, dismissive line. I sat on my couch watching the notifications pile up. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt something else, a kind of surreal detachment, like I was watching something happen to someone else. The video was doing what I couldn't. It was forcing them to see it, not because I explained better, not because I performed my worth more convincingly, but because reality arrived in a form they couldn't dismiss, because other people saw it, because the proof existed outside of my voice, and they couldn't ignore it without looking foolish to the people around them. By Tuesday morning, the comments had reached over 100. Someone had shared it on Twitter with a caption about supporting troops. Someone else had posted it to a military appreciation page. My name was searchable now. The video was public. The ceremony was real. The medal was documented, and my family couldn't erase it or reduce it or slide it into a drawer. It was Tuesday morning. I was getting ready for work when my phone rang. I saw her name on the screen. I hesitated. Then I answered. Her voice was tight. Controlled. She said she'd seen the video. Someone had sent it to her. She didn't say who. She said she didn't realize it was that kind of ceremony. She said it looked very official. She says she wished she'd known, like I hadn't told her, like I hadn't invited her, like the information had been kept from her. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I just said, I told you. You said you had dinner plans. There was a long pause. I could hear her breathing. Then she said, We didn't understand. I said, I know. She hung up quickly. I set the phone down. I didn't feel vindicated. I didn't feel angry. I felt tired because the video had done what I couldn't. It had forced them to see it, not because I explained better, not because I performed my worth more convincingly, but because reality arrived and stayed, because other people saw it, because the proof existed outside of my voice, and they couldn't dismiss it without looking foolish to the people around them. Over the next week, the messages kept coming, not from my family directly, but from people who knew them. Neighbors, friends of my parents, my dad's co-workers. The video was being shared in local Facebook groups. It was being forwarded in group chats. People were watching it. People were commenting. People were congratulating my family. And my family couldn't ignore it anymore, because other people wouldn't let them. On Thursday, Lauren sent a message. It wasn't an apology. It was something else. She said, People keep tagging me in that video. She said she didn't know it was a big deal. She said she felt like she should have been there. Her tone was defensive, like I'd set her up, like I'd orchestrated this to embarrass her. I didn't respond right away. I stared at the message. I thought about what to say. I thought about all the ways I could explain that she'd had the chance, that I'd invited her, that she'd chosen dinner plans over showing up, that she'd dismissed it with a laughing emoji, that she'd called it admin stuff. I thought about typing all of that. But I didn't want to fight. I didn't want to perform my hurt for her benefit. I thought about Proverbs. A gentle answer turns away wrath. I kept my tone controlled. I refused the blame shift. I wrote back, You were invited. You made a choice. That's not on me. I paused. Then I added, I'm not going to explain this anymore. If you want to understand what I do, the information is out there. You just have to decide to look. I hit send. I put the phone down. I felt something shift inside me. Not relief exactly, more like clarity. I wasn't chasing their approval anymore. I wasn't translating myself into a language they'd accept. I wasn't performing my worth in hopes they'd finally validate it. I was done. Lauren didn't reply. The conversation ended there, but my parents were different. Slower, more cautious. My mom started texting weekly, short messages, neutral questions. How's work? Are you eating okay? How's the weather there? Nothing heavy. Nothing about the video. Just small check-ins. Like she was testing the water. Like she was trying to rebuild contact without admitting why it had broken. My dad sent a couple of messages over the next month. He forwarded news articles. One was about Army medical units responding to a hurricane. Another was about combat medics receiving recognition. He didn't add commentary. He just sent the links. I knew what he was doing. He was trying to understand by proxy. He was trying to see my world without asking me directly. It was his style. Proof sharing instead of feelings. About 3 weeks after the video went live, my mom called again. It was evening. I was home. I'd just finished dinner. I was sitting on my couch with a book. My phone rang. I saw her name. I answered. She said she'd been talking to my aunt, my dad's sister, the one who lived 2 states away, the one I'd always liked, the one who asked real questions and listened to real answers. The aunt had brought up the video. She'd seen it on Facebook. Someone had shared it in a family group. She'd watched it. She'd asked my mom about it, and my mom said the aunt had said something that stuck with her. The aunt said it must have taken a lot of trust for my supervisor to put me forward for something like that. That leaders don't submit recognition packets lightly. That it means something when someone in authority builds a case for you, that it must mean I was doing work that mattered, that it wasn't just paperwork, that it wasn't just admin, that there was real weight to it. My mom was quiet for a moment. I could hear her breathing on the other end of the line. Then she said, "I didn't realize it worked like that." I didn't say anything. I let the silence sit. I wanted to see if she'd keep going. She did. She said, "I didn't realize someone had to put you forward. I thought it was just automatic, like everyone gets something eventually." I said quietly, "It's not automatic." She said, "I know that now." Another pause, longer this time. Then she continued, "I should have asked more about what you do, about what it means, about how it all works. I should have been curious. I should have cared enough to understand instead of just reducing it to something simple." Her voice was tentative, careful. She wasn't crying, she wasn't being dramatic, but I could hear something underneath. Regret, maybe, or just awareness. The slow, uncomfortable realization that she'd been wrong, that she'd missed something important, that she'd let years go by without really seeing me. She said, "I'm here now. If you want to talk, if you want to explain things, I'll listen." I felt something shift in my chest. Not forgiveness exactly, not relief, just a small softening, a small opening. I said, "Thank you." She asked how work had been lately, not in the dismissive way, not in the smoothing over way, but like she actually wanted to know. I told her about a long week, about a soldier who'd come in with symptoms that didn't add up, about how I'd flagged it for mental health, about how the soldier came back a week later to thank me for noticing, about how that's what the work is, noticing, connecting dots, making sure people don't fall through cracks. My mom listened. She didn't interrupt. She didn't try to reframe it. She just listened. And when I finished, she said, "That sounds important." It was a small thing, but it mattered. We talked for a few more minutes. Small things, safe things, but different than before. She asked about my plans for the weekend. I told her I was catching up on errands. She told me about a book she was reading. Normal conversation, the kind families have when they're not fighting, when they're not defending, when they're just talking. When we hung up, I sat there for a moment holding the phone. I felt something I hadn't expected. Not closure, not forgiveness exactly, but an opening, a small shift. The sense that maybe this was the beginning of something different. Not perfect, not erased, but different. Lauren stayed silent. No apology came, and I realized I wasn't waiting for one anymore. I wasn't waiting for the right words. I wasn't waiting for her to acknowledge what had happened. I was living without it, and that felt like freedom. I kept the medal in a drawer in my apartment, not the hallway drawer from childhood. My drawer, in my bedroom, safe, unremarkable. I didn't display it. I didn't take it out often. I didn't need to, because what I actually carried wasn't the medal. It was the long days, the quiet decisions, the trust under pressure, the moments when I chose to do the work well even when no one was watching. That's what I carried. And that didn't need a frame. I thought about Colossians. Whatever you do, work at it with all your heart, as working for the Lord, not for human masters. That became my frame. Service wasn't about being seen. It wasn't about applause. It was about being steady. It was worship in action. It was character built in the moments no one else noticed. I started mentoring younger soldiers, newer medics who were just learning the job, who felt overlooked, who felt like their work didn't count because it wasn't flashy, because it wasn't combat, because it was documentation and coordination and keeping systems running smoothly. There was one medic in particular. She'd been at the clinic for about 3 months. She was good at the technical parts, vitals, intake, basic procedures, but I could see her getting frustrated. One afternoon, she was finishing up paperwork after a long shift. I saw her jaw clench. She muttered something under her breath. I asked if she was okay. She looked up. She said, "Yeah, just tired of being invisible." I sat down. I asked what she meant. She said her family didn't understand what she did. They thought she was filing papers. They didn't get why she couldn't just explain it better. They asked when she was going to do something real. I understood. I told her I'd been there. I told her about the drawer, about the group chat, about spending years trying to translate my worth into terms people would accept. She listened. She asked how I dealt with it. I said, I stopped explaining. I let the work speak for itself. And eventually, reality caught up. I told her she didn't have to be loud to matter. She didn't have to explain herself into exhaustion. She just had to do the work. Show up, stay steady, hold the standard even when no one was watching. I told her that eventually the evidence would pile up, and people would have to deal with it. She asked if my family ever apologized. I said no, not really. But they shifted. They started asking questions. They stopped dismissing it. And I learned that was enough. She nodded. She said, "So you just accept that they'll never fully get it?" I said, "I accept that I don't need them to get it for me to know it matters." That became the message I kept giving to younger medics, to soldiers who felt overlooked in support roles, to people doing essential work that didn't come with visible glory. You don't need someone else's validation to know your work has weight. You don't need applause to know you're making a difference. You just need to be faithful to the standard. And the standard doesn't lie. One of the younger medics asked me once if my family understood what I did. I paused. I thought about how to answer honestly. I said, "They're starting to." She asked what changed. I said, "They saw proof they couldn't dismiss." I said, "The truth arrived in a form they couldn't ignore, and they had to deal with it." She nodded. She understood. She asked if I wished they'd shown up to the ceremony. I said, "I did. But I'm glad I didn't wait for them to validate me before I moved forward." That seemed to help her. My visits home became calmer, shorter. I went back to Ohio occasionally, weekends mostly, not every month, maybe every 6 weeks or 2 months. The rhythm changed. I wasn't avoiding them, but I also wasn't forcing connection. I let the visits happen naturally, when I felt ready, when I had time, when I wanted to. The conversations were different. My parents didn't ask intrusive questions. They didn't interrogate me about my plans or my career trajectory or when I was going to settle down. Work came up as fact, not contention. My dad would ask how things were going at the clinic. I'd say fine. Busy. He'd nod. He wouldn't push. My mom would ask if I was eating well, if I was getting enough sleep. Normal parent questions, not the questions that carried judgment underneath. My dad didn't make jokes anymore. No more secretary award comments. No more, "What's the plan after this?" questions. He'd just listen when I mentioned work. Sometimes he'd ask a clarifying question. "You said you're training new medics now? You mentioned a staffing issue last time. Did that get resolved?" Small questions, real questions, not dismissive ones. My mom didn't smooth things over. She didn't say, "You know how he is." She didn't make excuses for anyone. She just participated in the conversation. She asked follow-up questions. She remembered details from previous conversations. It was different. It was better. It wasn't perfect, but it was better. One weekend, I was sitting in the living room with my dad. It was a Saturday morning. My mom was out running errands. Lauren wasn't there. She lived in her own place now. We didn't see each other much. She hadn't apologized. I hadn't pushed for one. We were just in different orbits. My dad was reading the newspaper, the physical newspaper. He still got one delivered every morning. He was turning pages slowly, reading headlines, scanning articles. He stopped on something. He looked at it for a longer moment. Then he folded the paper and handed it to me. It was an article about Army medical coordination during a natural disaster response. A hurricane had hit the Gulf Coast a few weeks earlier. Army medical units had deployed to support civilian infrastructure. The article had details about triage systems, about mobile clinics, about the logistics of coordinating care when hospitals were damaged and resources were stretched, about the documentation systems that kept track of patients across multiple treatment sites. My dad pointed to a section. He said, "This kind of coordination matters." He didn't say more. He didn't say, "I'm proud of you." He didn't say, "I was wrong about what you do." He didn't apologize for calling it a secretary award. He didn't apologize for not showing up to the ceremony. But I knew what he was doing. He was recognizing something he couldn't name directly. He was seeing the work, not just seeing me. And because it wasn't about me specifically, it felt real. It felt like he was understanding the category, the field, the importance of what I did, not just trying to make me feel better. I said, "Yeah, it does." He nodded. He took the newspaper back. He went back to reading. And I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not validation exactly. Not the rush of being seen the way I'd wanted to be seen when I was younger. Just peace. Just a sense that I didn't need him to say the perfect words. I didn't need a grand apology. I didn't need him to sit me down and confess that he'd been wrong about everything. I just needed him to stop dismissing it, to stop reducing it, to stop treating my service like a phase or a mistake or something less valuable than what Lauren did. And he had. The dismissal had stopped. The reduction had stopped. And that was enough. We sat there for a moment in comfortable silence. Then he went back to reading. I looked around the living room. Lauren's trophies were still on the shelf. Her photos were still on the walls. My framed uniform photo was still in the hallway. But I didn't feel the sting anymore. I didn't feel like I was competing for space. I didn't feel like I needed to be on the wall to matter. I knew what I carried, and it didn't need a display. People don't always change because you explain better. Sometimes reality arrives and stays, and they have to deal with it. My parents never said, "We were wrong." They never sat me down and had a big emotional conversation about how they'd minimized my service for years. They never apologized for not showing up to the ceremony. They never acknowledged that they'd let dinner plans override their daughter's formal military recognition. But their behavior shifted in small ways. They asked more questions, real questions, not dismissive ones. Not questions designed to reduce what I did into something they could easily categorize. They asked about training, about responsibilities, about the challenges. They listened to the answers. They remembered details. They followed up in later conversations. They stopped reducing my work to a single dismissive line. When relatives asked what I did, my dad stopped saying, "She does medical paperwork." He started saying, "She's an Army medic. She works in patient care coordination." My mom stopped saying, "She's in a support role," with that apologetic tone. She started saying, "She's serving at a clinic on base." Small changes, but real ones. They started treating my service like something real. Like something that mattered, like something that had weight and value and impact. Not because I convinced them, not because I finally found the right words to explain it, but because they couldn't avoid the evidence anymore. Because the video existed, because other people had seen it, because the ceremony was documented, because the medal was real, because reality had arrived in a form they couldn't dismiss or ignore or slide into a drawer. I learned to live with incomplete resolution. I learned that you can feel whole without needing someone else's apology. I learned that you can carry peace even when the people who hurt you never fully acknowledge the hurt. I learned that honor is what you carry when no one is watching. It's not in the applause. It's not in the validation. It's not in someone finally saying the words you've been waiting to hear for years. Honor is in the decision to keep showing up. To do the work with integrity even when no one's paying attention, to serve without needing recognition, to hold your character even when the people who are supposed to see you don't, to stay faithful to the standard even when the standard isn't rewarded in the ways you think it should be. That's honor, and it doesn't require anyone else's acknowledgement to be real. The drawer was never about me. That's what I finally understood. It was about what my family knew how to value at the time, what they could see, what fit their framework, what matched their understanding of success and significance. And for years, I tried to make myself fit that framework. I tried to translate my worth into terms they'd understand. I tried to perform my value until they finally acknowledged it. I tried to explain and justify and defend and prove. And it exhausted me. It made me feel small. It made me feel like I was begging for something that should have been freely given. But I don't do that anymore. I don't translate. I don't perform. I don't beg. I just live. I do the work. I show up. I serve. I hold the standard. And I let reality speak for itself. The medal stays in the drawer. Safe. Not hidden. Not shameful. Just there. I take it out occasionally, when I need to wear it for a formal event, when I'm packing for a move, when I'm reminded of the ceremony and everything that led up to it. But most of the time, it stays where it is, in my drawer, in my space, where I decided to keep it. Because the real proof isn't something you pin to a uniform or hang on a wall. It's not something you display for other people to see and validate. It's the steady accumulation of days where you chose to be faithful, where you chose to serve well, where you chose to do the right thing even when it wasn't recognized, where you chose to hold your character even when no one was paying attention. That's the proof that matters. That's the proof that lasts. And it doesn't need a frame. It doesn't need a wall. It doesn't need anyone else's acknowledgement to be real. If you're watching this and you relate, I want you to hear this. You're not required to convince anyone of your worth. You're not required to perform your value until someone finally sees it. You're not required to translate yourself into terms other people will accept. Sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is stop explaining and start living. Let reality speak for itself. Do the work, show up, stay steady, hold the standard. And if they never say the words you're waiting for, you can still be whole. You can still know your worth. You can still carry honor. Because you already know what you carry. And that's enough. If this story resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found this helpful, consider subscribing for more stories like this. Thanks for listening.